here. After our talk by Mr. Laughlin today, break up for approximately an hour and a half, meeting again at 1:30 in these small groups. We hope by that time to have the arrangements made here and announce the locations earlier. If you missed that, talk to one of the guides or one of the hostesses who are here today for the program. The cafeteria line downstairs, if it's crowded just at the time we break up, usually the line dissipates after 10 or 15 minutes. I wouldn't want you to just be discouraged there. There are 3 restaurants down the street, about 2 blocks in the village. We had here in this panel a number of questions raised, all of them very interesting questions, but not altogether related. Some of them dealt with teacher education, some of them dealt with supervision, some of them dealt with scheduling and that sort of thing. And we had hoped that sometime during this conference we'd be able to present a rather organized development of some of the issues and problems that present themselves to people who are working with this curriculum development we call CORE. We've asked Dr. Hugh Laughlin from the Ohio State University to address us in that regard. He has had a long experience as a core teacher in the university school at Ohio State. Before that time, he was the social studies teacher in East Liverpool. Also for an extended period of time, he was a coordinator of curriculum development for work in the university school, and is now in the College of Education at Ohio State. He has been a contributor to many books and articles dealing with this problem of curriculum development. I'd like to introduce you now Dr. Hugh Laughlin from the Ohio State University.
Thank you very much, Vic. I'm very happy to be talking to people who are core teachers or who are interested in being core teachers or who are just interested in the core idea, because it seems to me that our conference, we're getting to the place where we're just a little pressured and maybe feel a little disorganized. It looks like we are continuously running out of question and comment period, and I'm happy that I'm not addressing the classical language group that's meeting here on the campus, because I'm sure they would be organized. But being a core teacher and knowing that you have an interest, I think it's just normal that we are disorganized. We always need more time, and we always feel some security in being able to plan on the spot. Consequently, if in these few remarks that I'm making it looks to you like I'm trying to think what to say next, what I'm probably doing is trying to reorganize in order to shorten it up, that you might have some minutes at the end for comments, questions, whatever you wish. That, by the way, is not disorganization, the result of trying to reorganize. I can assure you that is normal, too, for me. Now, I was interested, too, in this idea of a definition. There was one that was not mentioned. I assume you've heard the definition of core. It's the part of the apple on which everything hangs, and after you've eaten up the good, it's the part you throw away. I think that maybe that definition, while exaggerated in terms of its applicability to our problem, is one that might be given by many people as they see core as a word of value, a word or a program or an idea which is not too good. Dr. Clore mentioned that Mr. Whitman had as one item, a criterion in judging whether a school is or is not to be qualified as good, ask the question, do you have a core program? The idea being that if you do, it's probably not good. I'll tell you how the people in Columbus managed this problem, and he doesn't know this. I'm telling him at the same time. It's a story about a small 7th grader who, after 6 weeks in this program and having received his first marking card, the marks were not too good, came to the teacher and said, I must get out of this class. I'm just not making good marks. Is there any way I can get out of this self-concealed classroom? And I think that in Columbus, the self-contained classroom, here misinterpreted, was seen by the young man appropriately. I was interested, too, in this business of spelling that was mentioned, because in a study last summer, letters in response to a request trying to find out what demand for core teachers existed. I found out that a lot of men must sign the letters without reading them, because I got spellings of core as follows: K-O-R-E, C-O-R-P-S, C-O-R-E, and one letter from a man from a state adjoining your own, and it was not Ohio, in which, if it had just been spelled C-O-R-P-S-E, he would have been very satisfied. It was the only spelling I didn't get, but I thought that he probably would have appreciated his secretary's mistake. I think the spelling is not only an evidence that the term and concept is in the developmental stage, that is to say, presently confused and nebulous and in need of clarification, but I think there's some evidence that complete agreement among professional people as to the meaning and the nature of core curriculum has not been reached. The air is clearing, however, and I believe it important that we find some security from the idea. Let me see if I can give you some evidence on that. If you were to take Wright's study, Grace Wright, U.S. Office of Education, who made the study, reported in core curriculum in public high schools, I made some 4 years ago. I think you could look at that and find a benchmark. No study has been made of that magnitude since, but I think we all would recognize that the statistics there presented, the data, are not accurate today. The development since that time, just common knowledge, and what each one of us has seen, would suggest that the number of schools that are instituting core programs are numerous. And I think we've seen evidence here from the panel this morning of how the idea is growing. I believe that if we could talk a little bit about the origins of the core curriculum, the idea, in order to get a background, and then turn to some recent trends and the growth, not a statistical treatment, because that does not exist in the research. And then, thirdly, to some of the problems of developing core programs, and then to the problems of the future, just a few ideas for your thinking, that we might cover this quickly and get your comments. The core curriculum, as far as I can determine, is a new idea, 60 years old. It's a new idea in terms of getting into practice, but the idea stems from a time in which people got to wondering about, are we taking knowledge and splitting it up into small parts to the detriment of learning in order that we can live as intelligent beings? I think that if you were to read, in just one reference, and there are many besides this, but in one reference, the curriculum book by Smith, Stanley, and Shores, you very quickly get an idea as to this early development, some 60 years ago. And he refers there to the Ziller Plan and the Parker Plan, two plans in which these men thought, how can we reorganize these segmented knowledges around themes? 30 years ago, of course, we have the famous Virginia Plan, the State Department in the Virginia, a group of people who conceived the idea that the secondary schools, the junior high school particularly, what we would now call the junior high school, might utilize a program in which it would be a block of time where the counseling guidance function and the instructional function would be the two sides of the same coin. And that plan, coming from the State Department level in fair detail, that is, it was detailed out, and maybe accounts for one of the reasons why it was difficult for the teachers of the state to implement the ideas. But that plan stands in the history of core development as rather an outstanding and important direction point along the line. The thinking line behind the historical development of the core idea or core programs has had then these two major emphases. One, that knowledge has been separated out into disciplines or into segments or departmentalized or compartmentalized to the point where we can no longer see that it has much use to people other than having use per se. In other, it is of use to the scholar, or it is of use to the person who has a spatial motivation and interest in that subject matter as such. But when it comes a matter of people learning in order to solve problems, in order to live as better people, in order to be better citizens, why, we need to gather it back together and use it in such a way that it will educate us. Now, that is the general education, social orientation approach. What is the responsibility of the school as a social institution? The other emphasis is one, I think, that is more accountable for the development or the initiation of most core programs today. And that is that we have seen so many unholy things happening, particularly at the junior high school level, as far as the guidance counseling function is concerned. We take the 7th grader who has been in a self-contained classroom in the 6th grade, and suddenly over one summer we say, you're a new kind of young fella, and we'll just shift you around in this high school building according to bells that we ring, and we have seen so often how they fail to make the orientation to the subject courses. So therefore, if we could get at a block of time and one teacher spending more time with the group of young people, that would be good. And it looks to me like that guidance counseling function is the thing that is first in selling core to parents, teachers, administrators, and also one of the reasons why these programs are developing, the most important reason. I think that in a few years we are going to have the problem. For example, as someone asked the question, what about the extension of core program into the senior high school? I think that in some 5 or 10 years, if we continue to emphasize the development and initiation of core programs just in terms of the guidance counseling function, we're going to find ourselves creating a problem now that we'll have to solve or resolve in 5 to 10 years. Because if there is anything to this social orientation or the social responsibility, if that is part of the general education responsibility, and core is one structure, curriculum, pattern, to care for the general education responsibility, we cannot ignore it. In other words, I guess another way of saying that is that I think we ought to look to see whether we should be satisfied with a core program in which English and social studies are just placed next to one another in a block of time, and then be satisfied that that's as far as we need go with it. Because that to me just looks like kind of shuffling the subject matters together. And the core concept or idea has much more to it than that. Well, now, we saw between the time of the Virginia study and the last war a period in which there was much experimentation. It was, by the way, the period of great social crisis, social and economic crisis. You had the 8-year study during that period. By the way, at that time, many of the high schools involved in the 8-year study, of the 30 schools, used the core idea. And then, as we went into the war period and saw all curriculum develop plateau or actually stop, we also saw some regression. And you heard many people saying during the war and right after the war, core, that's an idea that was tried and found wanting. Let's not resurrect it. Let's not go back to that. Just like it was something that was old-fashioned now. Do not feel that that is true. I think that what we're doing now is picking up where it was left off, just in the time at the end of the 8-year study and just before the war came along. We have other curriculum development ideas that some are related, and I would say some in competition with the idea of core curriculum development. For instance, your life adjustment program is an example of trying to enrich in every classroom situation without disturbing the curriculum structure or pattern. And I would guess that for a staff or a school system that found that to work, it would be well that that be tried. But they should recognize that they are not doing anything to reorganize the structure or the pattern. The Citizenship Education Project, if you're familiar with some of the materials there produced, was a return to the idea of how can we get better citizens and let's do it without disturbing or upsetting the apple cart as to the present structure. The core program idea, then, is, to the best of my knowledge, the only idea that says you have to reorganize. You have to actually look at what you have, find out what of it you can do without in order to reorganize it and have something new. The extracurricular activity movement did not do that. That was just tacked on and bears the name extra, or sometimes we change it to a nice word, co-curricular or something like that. But it was in addition to the homeroom movement of some years ago, which grew like wildfire. Again, was just a matter of tacking on to what you have. But this core program idea is going to take the best minds and the best efforts that we have, because it is a fundamental reorganization idea. What are some of the problems then of developing core program? I think your panel did a marvelous job of pointing those out, and in the questions which followed, I think that we have in mind the problems that we need to discuss, the problems that we need to attack. Every one that I might mention, I think was mentioned either by the panel or in the questions asked after the panel had presented the information they had. I do think that this kind of a conference is almost a milestone. It certainly is something for which you people in Indiana should be very proud, because as far as I know, not very many places in many states have they instituted such conferences. This being your first, and I would hope not your last, I think that you are getting together to attack these problems. That too many places at the present time are not being attacked because people aren't organized. States aren't organized, school systems aren't organized to attack such problems. The demand for core teachers. Now I'm taking these in no particular order, but just mentioning some of the problems that we have today, as I see them, that relate to the development and relate not to any one situation, but as I see the picture as a whole over the United States. The demand for core teachers, it's difficult to separate the particularized demand for core teachers from the general demand for teachers. However, I mentioned this study of last summer. I found some things that were interesting to me about this that I'd like to share with you. This, by the way, will be part of a monograph of ASCD, which should be out in a few months, writing to what I would hope, I at least thought would be a non-biased group. The people who are in the offices where they are placing teachers, who have no particular axe to grind for or against the core idea, and ask them, what is the picture with regard to the demand for core teachers? These were the people in the Association of Teacher Placement Offices. And they wrote back, very cooperatively in their efforts, writing back, giving this kind of a picture. There is a noticeable and increasing demand for core teachers. In fact, some of them say we're just up against it, not only in terms of all teachers. High school teachers, elementary teachers, of course, that's been a story of the last 10 years. But in terms of core teachers, we're really up against it. We have more and more requests, and we have fewer and fewer people to suggest. They also predict that the demand will increase in the future. As they see it, as they talk with superintendents, the future would suggest that more and more superintendents, principals, school staffs are thinking about instituting such programs, and therefore the demand for core teachers will increase. They say that the teacher education institutions are not providing a sufficient number of qualified core teachers to meet the present demand, nor do they think to meet the future demand. Now here you have one of these circle things. Should the teacher education institutions get busy and put in programs to supply core teachers, for which at the present time they're not sure there are jobs? Or should the public school people get busy and institute programs in order to provide jobs that people in the teacher education institutions can train teachers for, you see? Well, from this study I came to the conclusion, and I'd like to give you a couple quotes that would be evidence in back of it. I came to the conclusion that the teacher education institutions can well afford, even in spite of the fact that they might say we don't see where we would place these core teachers, to go ahead and institute curricula for the preparation of core teachers. Oh, here are the quotes. These are for men in these offices. In the placement operation, we find that our core teachers are unusually well-trained and enthusiastic teachers and can be placed on that basis, even though they do not enter into a general program using their major interests. Another. Our students who have had this type of experience, meaning student teaching experience in a core program, seem to have little or no difficulty in securing positions. However, they are not always employed as core teachers, apparently. The administrators consider the training of core teachers to be desirable even for the teacher in a non-core program. And another. We have found that a teacher well prepared to do core work has a better opportunity for securing a position than do students trained in specialized fields with a major and a minor. And there is more to indicate that people trained to do core work are not going to have difficulties in securing jobs. And more than that, and more important, that the core idea carries with it in the training program a more modern idea as to what the role of the teacher should be in the modern secondary school. In-service education program problems are numerous. Release time was mentioned. That as one of the headaches. It's going to be an even greater headache, as was indicated by the panel. The business of teachers with old habits, or rather with habits which are old, and their tenacious fidelity to subject matter, seems to me to be one of the major problems in the in-service education program. There are some people who just seem to hop from one argument to the other. As you cut one out, they hop to another one. And as you cut that one out, they hop to another one. And then they finally get to these arguments and say, if you have lived as long as I have lived, you know that it won't work, or something like that. I think that there are some problems in the philosophy behind this idea of core programs. For instance, we have two distinct schools of thought with regard to whether or not general education and liberal education are or are not synonymous. Some people saying yes, they are. Other people saying no, general education means only that which is required of all pupils. I think that that's the one that any group instituting a core program needs to look at very seriously. I think it was mentioned, I think that the materials for the classroom, the textbooks, the libraries, the production of materials give us not only opportunities but serious problems. Whether or not the core should be organized in terms of unified subjects, or in terms of a cultural epic approach, or in terms of an adolescent needs approach, or in terms of no patterning, pre-planned pattern, give us some very, very serious problems. I would assume that some of those would be taken up in the group, the first group meeting this afternoon on pattern. I think interstaff relationships, the coordination and the administration of the core program not only present us with problems, but present us with some challenges and opportunities to find new ways of administering, new ways of coordinating, because the program, being a reorganization of the secondary school curriculum, is going to demand new ways. The core teacher, if my own experience has any bearing, and I would guess that some of you might agree, the core teacher has to be a person, although I chided about being disorganized, who is well organized, a person who is executing, a person who is administering, a person who is making decisions that in the past were left to the principal or to the administrator. It won't work if that teacher is not given the opportunity to make such decisions. I'm going to think about a field trip. I have to make decisions with regard to when, where, how, that I can check with an administrator, but if in every checking I find out that I do not have a yes occasionally, or most of the time, well, I'm not going to be as an effective core teacher as I would wish. And that, of course, is just out of line with most of our ideas with regard to line and staff organization of public schools. Some of the problems of the future. One I've hinted at, and that is that I think there are two directions we're going. Some people are going towards the non-pre-planned, non-structured, process is important, in fact, probably of prior importance to anything else. How you do it, teacher-pupil planning, and so on, is paramount, and what you do it about is secondary. Therefore, this group of people would not see the setting of problem areas as reported by most of the people on our panel. They would say that the organization that the learner can understand comes only from him having planned, participated, made decisions, and entered into the locating of the content. The minute you set a content, whether it even be in problem areas or by subject matter, you are going to defy the best theories of learning that we know today. Then I think there's another direction that some people are going, and that is to say that to pre-plan does not defy the modern theories of learning. That teachers need to pre-plan, they need to set down problem areas, they need to have a content determined in order that they will have something to work about, you see. The what are the problem areas. The how involves teacher-pupil planning, and so forth. And I think that these two things, for example, are evident in so many different places. One of the most unique or unusual places that the difference here came out was in a conference which was held earlier in the year at Morgantown. Over at Morgantown, a core instructor in the university school, the laboratory school, one day, standing in the classroom, thought to himself, I wonder why it is that we have so much difficulty getting together and sharing ideas. And as he went along with his thinking, it occurred to him, maybe we could do something here that might help. And he was a young fellow who didn't think small. He got to thinking about the whole United States. And he went to his superiors, he went to the principal and the dean, and I guess they must have gotten to the president of the university ultimately. And they decided that they would sponsor a conference, invitational conference, for the purpose of addressing themselves to the question, should there be a national council of core teachers? Should there be some kind of an organization, such as the English teachers have their organization, and the mathematics teachers have their organization, and the social studies teachers have the NCSS, and so on? Should there be one for core teachers that might be an affiliate of the NEA, or it might be part of ASCD, or it might not even be, but we at least ought to know. And so a convening conference was called, people were invited. Now in this conference it became evident that some people were saying yes, there should be, and other people were saying no, there shouldn't be. And as you looked at it, you found that those people who were thinking in terms of core being processed, of being non-pre-planned as far as content was concerned, that the core idea was really wrapped up in methodology. It was the way the teacher worked and the way the young people worked and the things they did in terms of activities and projects. We're saying we don't need an organization. And the people were saying there is a content in terms of general education, in terms of common learnings, and that content must be stated either as problem areas or as developmental tasks or whatever kind of statement you want to use. We're more inclined to say, believe there should be some way of getting together into a council. Now I give you that little story for two purposes. One, to indicate where you get this crossroads. The other, to let you know that what you're doing here in Indiana in this conference is being thought of by other people. Some may be not having the fortune of the leadership as the people here at Ball State in order to give you the opportunity to come together. But there'll be more and more of that, I'm confident, in the future. Well, I don't know. I said I was going to try to give you some time for comments, but I noticed that the time is almost here for lunch. I think in closing I might give you a statement that Earl Kelly uses and loves to use. Education of What is Real, one of his books over here on the table. He likes to say at the end of a talk, well, I've stood here for about a half hour on my feet and they're tired, and you've sat there for about a half hour and you're tired, so it's time to close off. The better story he uses, and maybe one common, and maybe it would be better used at the other conference today than this where people are interested in for. It's about the duffer that got in the sand trap, the ball going in right by a colony of ants, And as he got into the sand trap and got his club and tried to lift the ball out, he whaled away and never hit the ball, and the mayhem, and it was a catastrophe as far as the ants were concerned. Finally, one wise ant looked at the other and said, "You know, if we're going to live through this thing, we'd better get on the ball." And maybe for core teachers, in terms of some of the problems, we might well get on the ball. However, I would like to say, just this one word, it's a repetition, that I think that we could take heart, those of us who have an interest in this particular kind of program. Because as I see it, and I think as others see it, it is developing fast, it's developing in confusion, but at the same time the problems are there and we're trying to work on them. It would be worse if the confusion existed and no one really knew what to do about it and we weren't even interested in finding a definition. So that I think that those of us who today have an interest and are working on it, probably 100 years from now, these young students of education are going to be hearing about those of us who, yourself, were in at the beginning and really sweated it out, trying to get the thing on its feet, and I think by that time you'll see something on its feet that has great strength. Well, I don't know, is there any time for comment or for question, Vic? Or do you need to get away
I think
from
we have time for one or two, and we'd like to give them time to get some lunch.
Maybe you
gave a nice talk, and I want to... Could we have one or two questions here, and then we'll dismiss?
Maybe you'd want to do the same thing after the panel, just get the questions on the floor for this afternoon's group.
That probably would be. Would someone record these, or I try to pick them up for the round?
I'd like to ask, is it a question of either or, the structured or the